rope around Alara Vance's wrists cut into her skin as the guards dragged her up the wooden steps. The crowd below screamed for her death. Stones flew past her head. One struck her shoulder and she stumbled, but the guards yanked her upright before she could fall. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it would break through her chest. She was innocent. She had told them 100 times. Nobody listened. The executioner stood waiting at the top of the platform, his face hidden behind a black hood. He held a long silver blade that caught the weak morning light. Alara's knees buckled. She had seen this happen to other people. She had watched the blade fall on thieves and traitors. She never imagined it would be her turn, kneeling on cold wood, waiting for her life to end over a crime she did not commit. A guard forced her down onto her knees. The wood scraped her skin. Someone in the crowd threw rotten fruit, and it hit the platform beside her, splattering close to her hands. She flinched but did not cry out. She had promised herself she would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. Above her, on the balcony of the Grand Hall, sat Duke Alden Colt, dressed in deep red robes trimmed with gold. His face showed no mercy, only cold satisfaction. His son Edmund had been found dead 3 nights ago, and the entire city had decided, without proof, that Alara was the one who killed him. She had worked in the Colt household as a seamstress. She had mended Edmund's coats and hemmed his trousers. She had never wished him harm. The truth was simpler and darker than anyone wanted to admit, but no one had bothered to look for the truth. They wanted someone to blame, and Alara, a poor girl with no family to defend her, was the easiest target. The executioner raised the blade high above his head. The crowd fell silent, the kind of silence that comes right before something terrible happens. Alara closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, long dead, and hoped that wherever she was, she would forgive her daughter for not being strong enough to survive this cruel world. Then, the ground began to shake. At first, Alara thought it was her own body trembling with fear, but the shaking grew stronger, and gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned their heads toward the city gates. A low growl rolled across the square, deep and powerful, like distant thunder given voice. The executioner froze, the blade still raised. Through the gates came a wave of dark shapes, moving faster than any horse could run. Warriors in black armor, their eyes glowing faintly gold, poured into the square. The crowd scattered, screaming, but the warriors did not attack them. They moved with purpose, clearing a path straight to the platform. At the front of them walked a man unlike any Alara had ever seen. He was tall, broader than any soldier in the Duke's guard, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders, and eyes the color of amber fire. He wore no crown, yet everyone around him moved as though he commanded the very air. Power rolled off him in waves that made the hair on Alara's arms stand up. This was Killian Draven, Alpha King of the Northern Packs. Alara had heard stories about him, whispered in taverns and marketplaces. Some said he was a monster who ruled through fear. Others said he was the last honest ruler left in the land. Looking at him now, she could not decide which story was true. All she knew was that his presence had stopped an execution in its tracks. "Lower the blade," Killian said. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the entire square, silencing even the wind. The executioner did not move. Duke Alden Colt rose from his seat on the balcony, his face turning red with anger. "This is not your city, Wolf King. This woman murdered my son. She will pay with her life." Killian did not even look at the Duke. His golden eyes were fixed on Alara, kneeling on the platform with blood on her sleeve and terror in her eyes. Something in his expression shifted, like a man who had just found something he had been searching for his entire life without knowing it. "By the old law," Killian said, his voice calm but final, "any Alpha King may claim a condemned soul as his own, sparing them from death and binding them to his pack. I invoke that law now. This woman is mine." Gasps spread through the crowd. Even the guards holding Alara's arms loosened their grip, unsure of what to do. The Duke's face twisted with fury. "You cannot simply walk into my city and steal a criminal from justice," the Duke shouted. "She has not been proven guilty," Killian answered. "She has only been accused. And an accusation is not the same as truth." The Duke sputtered, searching for a response, but the law Killian spoke of was ancient, older than the Duke's own bloodline, and every noble in the land knew it could not be denied without breaking treaties that had kept peace between humans and packs for 200 years. To refuse would mean war, and the Duke, for all his cruelty, was not foolish enough to start one over a servant girl. "Take her then," the Duke finally spat, waving a dismissive hand. "But know this, Wolf King, if she is guilty, her blood will be on your hands, not mine." Killian said nothing more. He climbed the steps of the platform himself, his warriors parting to let him through. Alara stared up at him, unable to move, unable to speak. Up close, he was even more overwhelming, his shadow falling over her like a wall. "Are you able to stand?" he asked her, his voice softer now, meant only for her. She nodded, though her legs shook as the guards finally cut the rope from her wrists. Killian offered his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, and the instant their skin touched, a strange warmth spread through her arm, traveling all the way to her chest. She gasped softly, and judging by the flicker in his eyes, he had felt it too. He helped her to her feet. The crowd, still stunned into silence, watched as the Alpha King led the condemned woman down from the platform where she was supposed to die. No blade had fallen. No blood had been spilled, and yet everything in Alara's world had just changed completely. Outside the city gates, a group of horses and wagons waited, along with dozens more of Killian's warriors. Alara walked beside him in a daze, still trying to understand what had just happened. One moment she had been prepared to die. The next, she was being led away by a man the entire kingdom feared and respected in equal measure. "Why did you save me?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse from screaming and fear. Killian glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "That is a conversation for later. Right now, you need rest, food, and a healer for your shoulder." She looked down and saw the bruise forming where the stone had struck her. She had almost forgotten about it in the chaos. "I did not ask to be saved," she said, some of her old defiance returning now that the immediate danger had passed. "I do not know you. I do not know why you would risk angering the Duke for a stranger." "You are not a stranger," Killian said quietly. "Not anymore." Before she could ask what that meant, one of his warriors approached, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running down his left cheek. "My king, the wagons are ready. We should leave before the Duke changes his mind about honoring the law." Killian nodded and turned to Alara. "This is Fenwick, my second in command. He will make sure you are comfortable on the journey." Fenwick studied Alara with curious eyes, as though trying to understand what made her worth an Alpha King's public defiance of a Duke. He said nothing about it, only bowed his head slightly, and gestured toward one of the wagons. Alara climbed inside, her body finally allowing itself to shake now that the danger had passed. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold in the sobs that threatened to break free. She had been so certain she would die today. Now she was riding away from the city she had lived in her whole life, toward a place she knew nothing about, with a man whose power terrified her almost as much as the executioner's blade had. Killian rode alongside the wagon on a massive black horse, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her through the small window. She caught him watching more than once, and each time, a strange flutter moved through her chest that she could not explain and did not want to examine too closely. As the wagons rolled away from the city, Alara looked back one last time. The square where she had almost died shrank into the distance, along with the life she had known. She did not know what waited for her in the north, in the lands ruled by wolves and kings who could silence armies with a single word. But she knew, deep down, that there was no going back now. The journey to the north took most of the day. Alara drifted in and out of exhausted sleep, waking occasionally to the sound of hooves on the road or the murmur of voices outside the wagon. Each time she woke, she found herself listening for Killian's voice among them, though she refused to admit to herself why. By the time the sun began to set, the wagons passed through a massive stone archway, carved with wolves and mountains, entering a fortress unlike anything Alara had ever seen. Towers rose high into the darkening sky, and warmth radiated from the windows, a stark contrast to the coldness of the city she had left behind. Killian dismounted and walked to the wagon himself, opening the door before any servant could reach it. He offered his hand again, and again, that same warmth spread through her at his touch. "Welcome to Veyrath's northern reach," he said. "This is my home. For now, it is yours as well." Alara stepped down, her legs unsteady from the long ride, and looked up at the towering fortress before her. Guards lined the entrance, all watching her with curious, careful eyes, as though trying to determine what kind of woman could make their king break tradition in front of an entire kingdom. "I still do not understand," she said, turning to face him. "Why me? You do not know me. You risked war with the Duke over a woman you have never met." Killian's expression grew distant for a moment, as though he were searching for the right words. "There are things about the old laws that go deeper than politics," he said finally. "Things I do not yet fully understand myself. But I knew, the moment I looked at you kneeling on that platform, that I could not let the blade fall. Whether you believe it or not, some things cannot be explained with simple words." Elara did not know what to make of his answer. It felt both honest and incomplete, as though he was holding something back. But she was too exhausted, too overwhelmed by the events of the day, to press further. "Come," Killian said gently. "You need rest. Tomorrow we can talk more." She followed him inside the fortress, past halls lined with torches and tapestries, depicting wolves running beneath a full moon. Servants bowed as they passed, whispering among themselves. Elara felt every eye on her, every question unspoken but clearly present in the air. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair approached them in the main hall. "This must be her," the woman said, studying Elara with open curiosity. "Nora, please see that she has a room, warm food, and a healer for her shoulder," Killian said. Nora nodded and gestured for Elara to follow her up a winding staircase. Before Elara could take more than a few steps, Killian spoke once more. "Elara," he said, and she turned, surprised that he already knew her name. "You are safe here. No one will harm you within these walls." She wanted to believe him. Part of her, the part still trembling from the morning's terror, desperately wanted to trust those words. But another part of her, the part that had learned through years of hardship that safety was rarely given freely, remained cautious. "We will see," she said quietly, and turned to follow Nora up the stairs, leaving Killian standing alone in the great hall, watching her go, with an expression she could not read, one that mixed relief with something far deeper and far more uncertain. That night, lying in a bed softer than anything she had ever known, Elara stared up at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her shoulder had been treated and wrapped by a healer who worked with gentle, practiced hands. Her stomach was full for the first time in days. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the strange warmth from Killian's touch still lingering in her palm, and she wondered, with a mixture of fear and something she refused to name, exactly what kind of bond he had truly claimed her into. Outside her window, a wolf howled somewhere in the distant mountains, long and low, and somehow, impossibly, it felt like it was calling to something deep inside her chest, something that had been sleeping quietly her entire life and had only now begun to stir. Elara woke to sunlight pouring through unfamiliar windows, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories of the previous day crashed back into her all at once. The platform, the blade, the golden-eyed man who had stopped her execution with a single command. She sat up quickly, wincing at the ache in her shoulder, and looked around the room she had been given. It was larger than any space she had ever lived in, with a stone fireplace, a wooden wardrobe carved with images of running wolves, and thick furs laid across the floor to keep out the cold. Sunlight streamed through a window that overlooked mountains capped with snow. She had grown up sleeping in a cramped room above the tailor shop where she worked, sharing space with mice and drafts. This room felt like something out of a story told to children before bed. A soft knock came at the door, and Nora entered carrying a tray of food. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I hope you slept well." "I slept," Elara said carefully, unwilling to admit how many hours she had spent staring at the ceiling instead of resting. "Thank you for the food." Nora set the tray down on a small table near the fireplace. Fresh bread, warm broth, and dried fruit sat steaming in the morning light. Elara's stomach growled loudly, embarrassing her, but Nora only smiled. "Eat first," Nora said. "Eat. Questions can wait until your belly is full." Elara did not need to be told twice. She devoured the meal quickly, savoring flavors she had almost forgotten existed. When she finished, Nora helped her into a simple but well-made dress, far finer than anything Elara had owned in her life. "The king would like to see you this morning," Nora said as she fastened the last buttons. "There is much to discuss." Elara's stomach tightened, though whether from nerves or something else entirely, she could not say. Is he always so serious? She asked, trying to keep her voice light. Nora chuckled softly. Killian carries the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. He does not smile easily, but do not mistake his seriousness for cruelty. He is one of the fairest rulers I have ever served. Elara considered this, as Nora led her through the winding halls of the fortress. Servants and warriors alike nodded respectfully as they passed, though Elara still felt the weight of their curious stares. She was, after all, the woman the Alpha King had publicly claimed from an execution, defying a duke in the process. Word of that would have already spread through every corner of the fortress, if not the entire kingdom. They arrived at a large study, filled with maps, books, and scrolls. Killian stood near the window, looking out over the mountains, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned when they entered, and Elara noticed, not for the first time, how intense his golden eyes were, as though they could see straight through pretense to whatever truth lay beneath. "Thank you, Nora," Killian said. Nora bowed and left them alone. "Please, sit," Killian said, gesturing to a chair near his desk. Elara sat, though she kept her posture straight and guarded, unwilling to relax fully in the presence of a man she barely understood. "I imagine you have many questions," Killian said, taking the seat across from her. "More than I know how to ask," Elara admitted, "but I suppose the most important one is this. What exactly have you claimed me into?" Nora mentioned a bond. "The old law you spoke of at the execution. What does it mean for me?" Killian was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. The old law allows an Alpha King to claim a condemned soul and spare them from death, binding them into the pack as a mate. It is rarely used, because it requires the Alpha to sense something in that person, a connection that cannot be forced or faked. "A mate," Elara repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. "You barely know me." "I know," Killian said, "and I understand this is difficult to accept. But the moment I saw you on that platform, I felt something I have never felt before. A pull, deep and undeniable, toward you. It is not something I can fully explain with words, but it is real, and it will only grow stronger over time." Elara stood, pacing toward the window, needing space to think. "So I am bound to you now, whether I want to be or not." "The bond exists," Killian said carefully, "but what we do with it is not predetermined. I did not save you to make you a prisoner, Elara. I saved you because letting that blade fall would have been a mistake I could never undo. What happens between us now is a choice, one I hope we can make together, in time." She turned to face him, studying his expression for any sign of deception. She found none, only a quiet sincerity that unsettled her more than outright cruelty would have. She had expected a tyrant. Instead, she found a man who spoke carefully, who seemed to weigh every word before releasing it. "And if I choose not to accept this bond," she asked, "then you remain here, safe, free to live as you wish, within these walls," Killian said. "The bond does not require your consent to exist, but it does require your consent to deepen. I will not force anything upon you that you do not want." Elara studied him a moment longer, searching for cracks in his composure, some hint that his words were merely a performance, meant to win her trust, before revealing his true intentions. But the longer she looked, the more she began to believe he meant every word. "There is something else I must ask," she said finally, changing the subject to something that had weighed on her mind since the moment the wagons left the city. "Do you believe I killed Edmund Colt?" Killian's expression shifted, becoming more focused. "I do not believe you did," he said. "The moment I touched your hand yesterday, I felt truth radiating from you. An instinct bonded pairs share. It is one of the reasons I acted so quickly. I sensed your innocence before I ever heard your voice defend it." Relief flooded through Elara so suddenly that her knees nearly buckled. She had spent days pleading her innocence to guards and nobles who refused to listen, and now, finally, someone believed her, not out of kindness, but because some strange magic had shown him the truth. "Then you know I am innocent," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Will you help me prove it? The real killer is still free. Someone else deserves justice, not me." Killian's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flickered behind his golden eyes. "I intend to find whoever truly killed Edmund Colt," he said, "not only to clear your name, but because a murderer walking free, while an innocent woman, nearly paid for his crime, is something I cannot ignore." "Do you have any suspicions?" Elara asked. "Not yet," Killian admitted. But I have already sent word to trusted contacts within the city, people who owe me favors and know how to ask questions quietly. If someone within the cult household is responsible, we will find evidence, eventually. Elara nodded slowly, grateful for the promise, though uncertainty still gnawed at her. The Duke's family held immense power within the city. Anyone who dared investigate them risked severe consequences, and she did not want Killian to face danger on her behalf, especially not danger she had unknowingly brought upon him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing me, for everything." Killian's expression softened slightly. "You do not need to thank me for doing what is right." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the previous day's events settling over them both. Then Killian rose from his seat. "Come," he said, "let me show you the fortress grounds. It might help to see more of your new surroundings, rather than remaining confined to rooms and studies." Elara agreed, curious despite herself. As they walked through the halls and out into the courtyard, she noticed how the warriors and servants alike watched Killian with clear respect, bowing their heads or offering quiet greetings as he passed. He returned each acknowledgement with genuine warmth, remembering names, asking after families, checking on injuries from recent training exercises. This was not the tyrant she had expected from the rumors whispered in taverns. This was a leader who knew his people, who cared for them individually, rather than treating them as mere subjects. They walked past training grounds where warriors sparred with wooden swords, past stables filled with horses larger and stronger than any Elara had seen, past gardens where healers grew herbs for medicine. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of a community thriving, under careful, thoughtful leadership. "This is nothing like what I expected," she admitted, as they walked along a stone path overlooking the mountains. "What did you expect?" Killian asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Cruelty," Elara said honestly. "Fear. The stories about the northern packs paint you as monsters who rule through terror." Killian's expression grew somber. "Humans fear what they do not understand. We are different from them, yes, but different does not mean monstrous. I have spent my entire life trying to build something better than fear-based rule, something that could last beyond mere intimidation." "It shows," Elara said quietly, surprising herself with the honesty of the admission. They continued walking, the conversation flowing more easily than Elara had expected. Killian asked about her life before the accusation, and she found herself sharing details she rarely spoke of: her mother's death when she was young, the years spent learning tailoring to survive, the loneliness of working in a household that never truly accepted her as anything more than hired help. In turn, Killian shared pieces of his own past, the weight of becoming Alpha King at a young age after his father's sudden death, the constant balancing act between maintaining peace with human territories and protecting his own people from those who sought to exploit that peace. By the time the sun began to set, casting orange light across the mountain peaks, Elara realized she had spent hours in conversation with a man she had initially feared, and somewhere along the way, that fear had softened into something far more complicated, something she was not yet ready to name. As they made their way back toward the fortress, a warrior approached quickly, urgency written across his face. "My king," he said, bowing briefly. "A message has arrived from the city. It concerns the investigation into Edmund Colt's death." Killian's expression sharpened immediately. "What does it say?" The warrior hesitated, glancing briefly at Elara before continuing. "There are whispers, my king. Whispers that Edmund's own brother may know more about his death than he has admitted." Alara's breath caught in her throat. A brother, someone from within the family itself. If true, it would explain so much. The rushed accusations, the refusal to investigate further, the desperate need to place blame on someone convenient, rather than search for the actual truth. "Gather more information," Killian instructed the warrior, quietly. "We cannot act on whispers alone." The warrior nodded and hurried away, leaving Killian and Elara standing together in the courtyard, the weight of this new information settling heavily between them. "If it is true," Elara said slowly, "if Edmund's own brother killed him, why would the Duke allow me to be blamed instead of pursuing the truth?" Killian's expression darkened, perhaps because the truth would be far more damaging to his family than the death of a servant girl he considers replaceable. The cruelty of that possibility settled over Elara like a heavy stone. She had nearly died, not because anyone truly believed her guilty, but because her death was more convenient than the alternative, protecting the Duke's own bloodline from scandal and shame. "We will find the truth," Killian said firmly, as though sensing her rising despair. "I promise you that." Elara looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of false comfort, and found only quiet determination instead. For the first time since the executioner's blade had been raised above her head, she allowed herself to believe that justice, real justice, might actually be within reach. As night fell over the fortress, Elara returned to her room, her mind swirling with the day's revelations. The bond Killian spoke of, the possibility of Edmund's brother being the true killer, the strange warmth that lingered every time Killian's hand brushed against hers, all of it tangled together into a confusing mess of emotions she had never experienced before. She sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the mountains, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Whatever answers waited for her in the days ahead, one thing had become clear during her time within these fortress walls. The world she thought she understood, filled with cruel wolves and helpless victims, was far more complicated than she had ever imagined, and somewhere within that complexity, she had begun, however cautiously, to hope again. 3 days passed before Killian received the confirmation he had been waiting for. Elara had spent those days exploring the fortress further, slowly growing more comfortable within its walls, though sleep still came difficult some nights, her mind replaying the horror of the execution platform whenever she closed her eyes. She was in the garden, helping one of the healers gather herbs, when Fenwick approached with news written clearly across his weathered face. "The king requests your presence," he said, immediately. Elara wiped the dirt from her hands and followed Fenwick through the fortress halls, her heart already racing with anticipation. She had waited days for answers about the investigation, and something in Fenwick's urgent tone told her those answers had finally arrived. Killian stood in his study once more, several documents spread across his desk, his expression grim but focused. He looked up as she entered, and something in his eyes told her the news was significant. "We have confirmation," Killian said without preamble. "Victor Colt, Edmund's older brother, has been secretly meeting with moneylenders in the city for months, drowning in debts he could not repay. Edmund, as the favored younger son, stood to inherit the majority of their father's estate upon the Duke's death, an arrangement that left Victor with nothing but scraps." Elara's hands trembled slightly as she absorbed this information. "You believe Victor killed his own brother for inheritance?" "The evidence strongly suggests it," Killian confirmed. "Witnesses have come forward, quietly, describing an argument between the brothers, the night before Edmund's death. Servants who feared speaking out before, given the Duke's temper and influence, are now willing to testify, protected under my authority." "Why would they trust your protection over the Duke's justice?" Elara asked. "Because they know the Duke's justice serves only the Duke's interests," Killian said. "And because word has spread of how I treated you, an accused woman given fair consideration, rather than immediate execution. It has given others courage to speak the truth they were too afraid to voice before." Elara sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. For days, she had carried the fear of being hunted as an escaped criminal, the knowledge that somewhere, a killer walked free while she bore the blame for his actions. Now, finally, real evidence existed, evidence that could clear her name and bring true justice to Edmund's memory. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, we present this evidence to the Duke," Killian said, carefully, and with enough witnesses and documentation that he cannot simply dismiss it or bury it to protect his remaining son. "He will not want to believe it," Elara said quietly. "Victor is still his son, his heir, now that Edmund is gone. Which is precisely why we must proceed with absolute certainty," Killian replied. "One shred of doubt, and the Duke will use it to protect Victor, and continue blaming you instead." The weight of this responsibility settled heavily over Elara. Her freedom, her very life, depended on evidence strong enough to overcome a grieving father's desperate need to protect whatever family he had left, however guilty that family member might be. "I want to help," Elara said suddenly, surprising even herself with the conviction in her voice. "I worked in that household for years. I know things about the family dynamics that outsiders might miss. Let me help build this case." Killian studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his golden eyes. "Are you certain?" Returning to that environment, even briefly, could be dangerous. I have already faced an executioner's blade, Ilara said firmly. I am not afraid of Duke Alden Colt or his remaining son. If anything, I owe it to Edmund's memory to help ensure his true killer faces justice. After a moment of consideration, Killian nodded. Very well, but you will not go alone. Fenwick and several of my warriors will accompany you at all times. Over the following days, Ilara worked closely with Killian's investigators, sharing details about the Colt household that proved surprisingly valuable. She remembered specific arguments she had overheard while mending clothes in nearby rooms, tensions between Victor and Edmund that had grown increasingly hostile in recent months. She recalled Victor's growing desperation, his increasingly erratic behavior whenever conversations turned toward inheritance and family finances. Each piece of information added weight to the case being built against Victor Colt, transforming whispers and suspicions into a coherent picture of motive and opportunity that would be difficult for even the Duke to ignore. During this time, Ilara also found herself growing closer to Killian in ways she had not anticipated. They worked side by side most evenings, reviewing evidence and planning their approach to the Duke. And somewhere within those long working sessions, the wariness she had initially felt toward him began transforming into something resembling genuine trust, and perhaps something even deeper that she was not yet ready to fully acknowledge. One evening, after a particularly long session reviewing witness testimonies, Ilara found herself studying Killian as he worked, noting the careful way he handled each piece of evidence, treating even the smallest detail with the same seriousness as the largest revelation. He caught her staring and offered a rare, genuine smile. "You have been quiet this evening," he observed. "Just thinking," Ilara admitted. "A week ago, I was certain I would die on that platform. Now here I am, helping build a case against the man who actually deserves that fate." "Life has a way of surprising us," Killian said quietly. "Sometimes in terrible ways, but occasionally, in ways we never expected to be grateful for." Ilara considered this, studying his face in the flickering candlelight. "Do you regret claiming me? Risking war with the Duke over a stranger?" Killian's expression grew serious. "Not for a single moment," he said. "Whatever happens with the investigation, whatever choices you make regarding our bond, I have never regretted the decision to stop that execution." Something warm bloomed in Ilara's chest at his words, a feeling she was still learning to recognize and understand. She had spent so many years guarding herself against vulnerability, protecting her heart from disappointment and betrayal, that this growing warmth toward Killian felt both wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. "Thank you," she said softly, "for treating me as more than just an obligation under some ancient law." "You are far more than an obligation, Ilara," Killian said, his voice low and sincere. "You have proven yourself intelligent, brave, and honest, in ways I did not anticipate when I first saw you kneeling on that platform. Whatever the bond between us ultimately becomes, know that my respect for you exists independent of any ancient law or supernatural pull." The sincerity in his words left Ilara momentarily speechless. She had expected many things from the Alpha King who had saved her life: power, authority, perhaps even arrogance given his position. She had not expected such genuine humility, such careful respect for her autonomy, despite the bond that connected them. Their conversation was interrupted by Fenwick entering with urgent news. "My king, we have received word. Duke Alden Colt has agreed to hear our evidence, but only under specific conditions." "What conditions?" Killian asked, his relaxed demeanor immediately shifting back to careful alertness. "He demands the meeting take place within the city, in the presence of the full court, and he insists Ilara herself must attend, to face her accusers directly, alongside Victor Colt." Ilara's stomach twisted with anxiety at this news. Returning to the city, facing the court that had condemned her so readily, standing before the Duke and his remaining son as evidence of murder was presented, all of this filled her with dread, despite the justice she hoped it would ultimately bring. "It is dangerous," Killian said, his jaw tightening with concern. The Duke could use this gathering as an opportunity to reassert his authority, to twist the narrative back in his favor, despite the evidence against Victor. "But if we refuse," Ilara said slowly, working through the implications herself, "it will look as though we have something to hide, as though our evidence cannot withstand scrutiny." Killian nodded grimly. clearly reaching the same conclusion. We have no real choice but to accept his conditions then. But we will prepare carefully. I will not allow the Duke to manipulate this situation to protect his son at your expense. That night, Alara lay awake long after the fortress had fallen silent, her mind racing through possible scenarios awaiting her in the city. She thought of the crowd that had jeered for her death mere weeks ago, the same crowd that would now witness whether justice could truly prevail against a Duke's desperate desire to protect his bloodline. She thought too of Killian, of the growing warmth she felt whenever he was near, the strange comfort his presence brought despite the danger surrounding them both. Whatever happened in the city, whatever the outcome of this confrontation with the Duke, she found herself grateful, genuinely and deeply grateful, that fate had brought this unusual, powerful, surprisingly gentle man into her life, at the exact moment she needed saving most. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Alara rose from her bed, dressed carefully, and prepared herself for the journey back to the city that had once tried to end her life. Whatever waited for her there, she would face it with newfound courage, courage she had not possessed before the executioner's blade had been raised above her head, courage that had somehow grown from the ashes of that terrifying morning into something stronger and more resilient than she had ever imagined herself capable of becoming. The journey back to the city felt entirely different from the one Alara had taken weeks before. This time, she rode not in a cramped wagon reserved for prisoners, but on a horse, beside Killian himself, dressed in fine clothing that marked her as someone under the protection of the Alpha King, rather than someone condemned to death. Still, anxiety gnawed at her stomach, as the familiar city walls came into view. Memories of the execution platform, the jeering crowd, the cold terror of facing death, all of it rushed back with painful clarity. Killian must have sensed her tension, because he guided his horse closer to hers. "You are safe," he said quietly. "Whatever happens today, I will not allow harm to come to you." Alara nodded, grateful for his presence, though the fear remained a constant companion as they passed through the city gates. Word had clearly spread of their arrival, as crowds lined the streets, whispering and pointing, as the procession moved toward the grand hall where the Duke awaited them. Inside the hall, tension hung thick in the air. Duke Alden Colt sat upon his throne, flanked by guards and advisors, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious strain evident in his tired eyes. Beside him stood Victor Colt, Edmund's older brother, his posture rigid, his gaze darting nervously toward Alara and Killian as they entered. "Alpha King," the Duke said formally, though his voice carried barely concealed hostility. "You have requested this audience to present evidence regarding my son's death. I trust you have something substantial, given the seriousness of these accusations." "We do," Killian said firmly, stepping forward with the collected evidence. Evidence that clears Alara Vance of any wrongdoing, and points toward the true culprit behind Edmund's murder. Murmurs rippled through the assembled court as Killian began presenting the evidence methodically. Witness testimonies describing the escalating arguments between the brothers, documentation of Victor's substantial debts to moneylenders throughout the city, servants who had overheard threatening conversations in the days leading up to Edmund's death. Victor's face grew increasingly pale as the evidence mounted, his composure cracking with each new revelation. The Duke, however, remained stubbornly resistant, his need to protect his remaining son clearly overpowering any objective consideration of the facts being presented. "This is circumstantial," the Duke insisted, his voice rising with barely controlled panic. "Servants gossiping, debts that prove nothing beyond financial struggle. None of this proves my son murdered his own brother." "Then perhaps direct testimony will prove more convincing," Killian said calmly, gesturing toward the entrance of the hall. A young servant girl entered, visibly trembling but resolute, escorted by two of Killian's warriors for protection. Alara recognized her immediately, a maid named Lila who had worked closely within the Colt household during Alara's time there as well. "Tell the court what you witnessed," Killian instructed gently. Lila's voice shook as she began speaking, but her words carried clearly through the silent hall. "I was cleaning near Master Edmund's chambers the night he died. I heard raised voices, an argument between the two brothers. Master Victor was demanding money, threatening that he would find a way to claim what he believed was rightfully his, one way or another." "This proves nothing beyond an argument," the Duke snapped, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. There is more, Lila continued, glancing nervously at Victor before finding the courage to continue. I saw Master Victor leaving his brother's chambers late that night, hours after Master Edmund was supposedly last seen alive. His hands were shaking, and there was blood on his sleeve. I was frightened, and I did not speak of it before, fearing for my own safety within this household. Gasps echoed through the hall at this revelation. Victor's face had gone completely white, his earlier composure entirely shattered. He stepped backward, shaking his head frantically. She is lying, Victor shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. This is a fabrication, meant to protect that servant girl and please the Wolf King who claimed her. Why would I fabricate such a dangerous accusation against my own master's son? Lila countered, finding unexpected strength in her voice despite her obvious fear. I risk everything by speaking this truth, yet I could not remain silent while an innocent woman nearly died for a crime she did not commit. The Duke's face had grown ashen as the weight of the evidence continued mounting against his remaining son. He looked between Victor and the assembled court, clearly struggling to reconcile his desperate need to protect his bloodline with the increasingly undeniable truth being revealed before him. There is one final piece of evidence, Killian said, producing a small dagger wrapped carefully in cloth. This was recovered from Victor Colt's chambers, hidden beneath loose floorboards. The blade matches wounds found on Edmund's body precisely. The Duke stared at the dagger, recognition and horror mixing across his features. That cannot be, he whispered, though his voice lacked conviction now. Victor's composure finally shattered completely. He was going to inherit everything, Victor shouted, tears streaming down his face, as months of suppressed guilt and desperation finally broke free. Everything our father built, and I would have received nothing, treated as though I did not matter, simply because I was born first, to a mother our father never truly loved. Edmund flaunted his inheritance, mocked my debts, refused to help, despite having more wealth than he could ever spend. I did not plan to kill him. We argued, and something inside me broke. The confession, spoken aloud before the entire court, left the hall in stunned silence. The Duke sat frozen upon his throne, staring at his remaining son, with an expression of profound grief and betrayal, watching decades of careful family reputation crumble in a single devastating moment. Victor Colt, Killian said formally, his voice carrying the weight of undeniable authority. You stand confessed before this court of the murder of your own brother, Edmund Colt. Justice demands accountability for this crime. The Duke rose slowly from his throne, his face aged years within these few devastating minutes. My son, he said quietly, though whether speaking to Victor or mourning Edmund, Elara could not determine. What have you done? Guards moved forward to take Victor into custody. His earlier defiance completely collapsed into broken sobbing. The court watched in stunned silence as the man who had allowed an innocent woman to face execution, rather than confront uncomfortable truths about his own family, was finally forced to acknowledge the devastating reality of his son's guilt. Elara stood beside Killian throughout this entire revelation, her emotions a complex tangle of relief, vindication, and unexpected sorrow. She had wanted justice, had needed her innocence proven beyond doubt, yet witnessing the Duke's devastation, watching a family destroyed by greed and desperation, brought no true satisfaction, only a heavy, somber weight settling over the entire hall. The Duke turned toward Elara finally, his expression a mixture of shame and reluctant acknowledgement. It seems I owe you an apology, he said, his voice hollow with exhaustion and grief. One that cannot possibly undo the suffering I nearly caused you through my desperate need to protect what I believed was left of my family. Apologies cannot undo what nearly happened, Elara said honestly, though without malice in her voice. But I am grateful the truth has finally been revealed, for Edmund's sake as much as my own. The Duke nodded slowly, seeming to age further with each passing moment. Your innocence is officially recognized before this entire court, he announced formally. All charges against Elara Vance are permanently dismissed, and I offer whatever compensation might ease the suffering my hasty judgment nearly caused. I require nothing beyond the acknowledgement of truth, Elara said. That is compensation enough. As the court began dispersing, whispered conversations already spreading news of Victor's confession throughout the city. Killian guided Elara from the hall, his hand resting protectively at her back. Once outside, away from prying eyes and eager gossip, He turned to face her fully. "You handled that with remarkable composure," he said, genuine admiration evident in his voice. "I feel strange," Alara admitted, her earlier vindication mixing uncomfortably with lingering unease. "I should feel relieved, and I do, but watching that family destroyed, watching Victor break down so completely, it does not feel like the victory I imagined." "True justice rarely feels like simple victory," Killian said gently. "It often carries the weight of tragedy alongside relief. What matters is that truth has finally been acknowledged, and you are free from the false accusations that nearly cost your life." Alara nodded, allowing his words to settle over her, easing some of the conflicted emotions still swirling within her chest. As they walked back toward their horses, preparing for the return journey to the fortress, she found herself once again grateful for Killian's steady presence beside her, his ability to offer comfort and perspective, even amid the complicated aftermath of hard-won justice. "What happens now?" she asked, as they mounted their horses, the city gates coming into view ahead. "Now," Killian said, "we return home, and you begin building the life you deserve, free from false accusations, and the fear that has haunted you since that terrible morning on the execution platform. Home." The words settled strangely in Alara's chest as they rode away from the city that had once tried to end her life. She was uncertain, even now, exactly what home meant for her anymore, whether it referred to the fortress in the north, to the bond connecting her to Killian, or simply to the growing sense of safety and belonging she had begun cultivating since that fateful morning weeks ago. Whatever the answer, she found herself looking forward to discovering it, riding beside a man who had transformed from a terrifying stranger into someone she trusted deeply, someone whose presence brought comfort rather than fear, someone who had proven, time and again, that his actions matched his words in ways she had rarely experienced throughout her difficult life. As the city disappeared behind them, replaced gradually by rolling hills and distant mountains, Alara allowed herself, for the first time since the executioner's blade had been raised above her, to imagine a future filled with genuine hope, rather than merely desperate survival. The weeks following Victor Colt's confession brought unexpected peace to the northern fortress, though peace, Alara quickly learned, rarely lasted uninterrupted, in a world balanced precariously between human territories and the northern packs. She settled into a comfortable routine, assisting the healers with herb gathering, learning basic combat techniques from patient warriors who treated her with genuine respect, and spending increasing amounts of time with Killian himself, their conversations growing deeper and more personal with each passing day. The bond between them had continued strengthening, subtle at first, then increasingly undeniable. Alara found herself instinctively aware of Killian's presence, even in crowded rooms, sensing his moods and emotions with startling accuracy, despite the physical distance sometimes separating them. She had asked Nora about this phenomenon, curious whether it was normal for bonded pairs. "The connection grows stronger the more time you spend together," Nora had explained, smiling knowingly. "It is the pack's way of ensuring true mates find harmony, understanding, and trust before fully committing to each other." Alara had absorbed this information thoughtfully, still uncertain exactly how she felt about the supernatural bond connecting her to a man she had known for merely weeks, yet finding herself increasingly comfortable with the growing intimacy it fostered between them. One evening, as autumn winds began carrying the first hints of winter's approach, Alara sat with Killian in the fortress gardens, watching the sunset paint brilliant colors across the darkening sky. Their conversation had grown quiet, comfortable silences interspersed with occasional observations about the changing seasons, the beauty of the mountains, the simple pleasures of shared companionship. "I have been thinking," Killian said finally, breaking the peaceful silence, "about our bond, and what it means for both our futures." Alara turned to face him, curiosity and slight nervousness mixing in her chest. "What have you been thinking?" "I know this began under extraordinary circumstances," Killian said carefully. "I claimed you to save your life, invoking an ancient law meant for exactly such situations. But what has grown between us since then feels like far more than mere obligation or supernatural pull." Alara's heart raced as she listened, sensing the sincerity and vulnerability in his words, so different from the confident, authoritative king she had first encountered on that terrifying execution platform. "I have grown to care for you deeply," Killian continued, his golden eyes holding hers steadily, despite the obvious risk in his admission. Not because ancient law demands it, but because you have proven yourself intelligent, courageous, and genuinely kind throughout everything you have endured. I would understand if you needed more time before considering anything beyond our current bond, but I wanted you to know the depth of what I feel, regardless of what you ultimately decide. Alara sat quietly for a moment, absorbing his words, feeling the truth radiating through their bond, as clearly as if he had shouted it aloud. She thought of everything that had happened since that terrible morning weeks ago, the terror of the execution platform, the shock of Killian's intervention, the slow, careful trust that had grown between them through shared investigation and honest conversation. I have felt something growing as well, she admitted quietly, her own vulnerability matching his. I did not expect this, certainly not from someone who saved me under such extraordinary circumstances. But you have shown me kindness, respect, and genuine partnership throughout everything, qualities I never expected to find, especially not from someone with as much power as you possess. Killian's expression softened with obvious relief and happiness at her words. Then, perhaps, he said carefully, we might consider exploring what this bond could become, not rushing anything, but allowing ourselves the possibility of genuine partnership beyond mere obligation. I would like that, Alara said, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. Their conversation was interrupted, as such moments often seem to be within the fortress, by Fenwick, approaching with visible urgency. My king, he said, bowing briefly. Forgive the intrusion, but concerning news has reached us. Killian's relaxed demeanor immediately sharpened into careful attention. What news? Reports suggest tension building among several eastern pacts, Fenwick explained. Rumors of an alliance forming against your authority, specifically citing your claim of a human woman as justification for questioning your judgment and leadership. Alara's stomach tightened with sudden anxiety. She had not considered that her presence within the fortress might create political complications beyond her personal circumstances, potential threats to Killian's authority among his own people. Who leads this supposed alliance? Killian asked, his voice carefully controlled despite obvious concern. Garen, primarily, Fenwick said, along with Isolde, who has long sought greater influence within pack politics. They argue that claiming a human, particularly one accused of murder regardless of eventual innocence, demonstrates poor judgment unbecoming of an Alpha King. Killian's jaw tightened at this information, though he glanced toward Alara with obvious reassurance in his eyes. This is not the first time Garen has sought opportunities to challenge my authority, he said, but this situation requires careful handling, particularly given the political sensitivity surrounding our bond. Perhaps I should leave, Alara said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could fully consider them. If my presence creates such significant political complications, perhaps it would be better for everyone if I simply left the fortress, allowed things to settle without additional controversy. No, Killian said firmly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. I will not allow political maneuvering from ambitious pack members to dictate decisions about our bond. Garen and Isolde seek any excuse to challenge my leadership, and yielding to their pressure now would only demonstrate weakness they could exploit further in the future. But if it threatens your position, your authority among your own people, Alara pressed, genuine concern evident in her voice, surely that matters more than personal feelings between us. Our bond is not merely personal feelings, Killian said, taking her hands gently within his own. It represents exactly the kind of leadership I believe in, choosing partnership based on genuine connection and mutual respect, rather than rigid tradition or political convenience. If my own people cannot accept that, then perhaps the true test of my leadership lies in demonstrating why such choices matter, rather than abandoning them at the first sign of resistance. Alara studied his expression, finding unwavering determination alongside genuine affection, and felt something within her chest settle with quiet relief and growing admiration for this man, who continued surprising her with his integrity and conviction. Very well, she said finally, but please, allow me to help however I can in addressing these concerns. I do not wish to remain a passive complication within your political challenges. Killian smiled, genuine warmth spreading across his features, despite the serious circumstances surrounding them. Your willingness to face challenges directly, rather than retreating from difficulty, is precisely one of the qualities that drew me to you from the very beginning." Over the following days, Killian worked carefully to address the growing political tension, meeting with various pack leaders individually, explaining his reasoning, demonstrating through careful diplomacy that his judgment remained sound despite unconventional circumstances surrounding his claiming of Alara. Some leaders accepted his explanations readily, respecting his authority and trusting his judgment based on years of fair leadership. Others, particularly those aligned with Garen's ambitions, remained skeptical, using the situation as convenient justification for questioning Killian's fitness to lead. Alara, meanwhile, focused on demonstrating her own value within the fortress community, working diligently alongside healers and warriors, learning their customs and traditions with genuine respect and enthusiasm, slowly earning the trust and acceptance of those who had initially viewed her with suspicion or outright hostility. One afternoon, while practicing basic self-defense techniques under the patient instruction of a warrior named Renwick, Alara noticed Isolde watching from a distance, her expression calculating and cold. When their session concluded, Isolde approached directly, her posture radiating barely concealed hostility despite her carefully neutral tone. "You have caused quite a disturbance within our community," Isolde said, her voice deceptively pleasant, despite the obvious criticism embedded within her words. "I did not seek to cause disturbance," Alara replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated despite her racing heart. "I simply sought survival, and gratitude toward the man who provided it." "Gratitude," Isolde repeated, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Is that truly all this is? Simple gratitude toward your rescuer? Or have you positioned yourself carefully to claim power and influence you never possessed before, exploiting an ancient law meant for genuine bonds rather than human ambition?" Alara felt anger flare within her chest at this accusation, though she forced herself to remain composed, despite the provocation clearly intended within Isolde's words. "I did not ask to be claimed," she said firmly. "I did not manipulate circumstances to secure Killian's protection. I was moments from execution, and he chose, of his own volition, to intervene. Whatever bond has grown between us since then has developed through genuine connection, not calculated ambition." Isolde studied her for a long moment, clearly searching for weakness or deception within Alara's response. Finding neither, her expression shifted slightly, though hostility remained evident beneath her carefully controlled features. "Perhaps," she said finally, "time will reveal the truth of your intentions, one way or another. Know only this, human. Many within our community will be watching closely, waiting to see whether your presence ultimately strengthens or weakens our king's authority." With that, Isolde departed, leaving Alara standing alone within the training grounds, her earlier confidence shaken slightly by the confrontation's underlying threat. She understood, perhaps more clearly than ever before, the precarious position her bond with Killian had created, not merely for herself, but for his entire leadership and the stability of his kingdom. That evening, she shared the confrontation with Killian, watching his expression grow increasingly troubled as she recounted Isolde's pointed accusations and thinly veiled threats. "I am sorry you had to face such hostility," Killian said, genuine regret evident in his voice. "Isolde has long sought opportunities to undermine my authority, and your presence has unfortunately provided convenient justification for her ambitions." "I am not afraid of her words," Alara said, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed lingering unease, despite her brave declaration. "But I worry about what lengths she and Garen might pursue to achieve their goals, particularly if subtle political maneuvering fails to accomplish their desired outcome." Killian's expression darkened with obvious concern at this observation. "You raise a valid concern," he admitted. "Garen and Isolde have both demonstrated willingness to pursue questionable methods when direct approaches fail to achieve their ambitions. We should remain vigilant, particularly regarding your safety within the fortress." Little did either of them know, as they discussed these growing concerns within the relative safety of Killian's study, that Garen and Isolde had already begun planning something far more dangerous than mere political maneuvering, a plan that would soon threaten not just Killian's authority, but Alara's very life, testing the strength of their bond and the depth of their commitment to each other, in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The attack came without warning, 3 days after Alara's tense confrontation with Isolde in the training grounds. She had been walking alone through the fortress gardens during the quiet hours before dawn, unable to sleep, her mind restless with lingering concerns about the political tensions Killian continued navigating on her behalf. She never saw the figure emerge from the shadows until it was almost too late. A hand clamped over her mouth, muffling her scream, while another arm wrapped tightly around her waist, dragging her backward into the darkness between two garden walls. Panic surged through her body, instinct taking over, as she struggled desperately against her attacker's grip, remembering the basic techniques Renwick had patiently taught her during their training sessions. She drove her elbow backward with all her strength, connecting solidly with what felt like ribs, and heard a grunt of pain from her attacker. The grip loosened just enough for her to twist free, stumbling forward, and finally releasing the scream that had been trapped within her throat. Guards responded almost instantly, drawn by her cry, converging on the garden from multiple directions. Her attacker, realizing the ambush had failed, attempted to flee, but Renwick himself intercepted the fleeing figure, tackling him to the ground with practiced efficiency. Within moments, Killian arrived, his expression a mixture of fury and desperate concern as he rushed toward Alara, checking frantically for injuries, despite her assurances that she remained largely unharmed, beyond minor bruising. "I am fine," Alara insisted, though her trembling hands betrayed the lingering shock from the attempted attack. "Truly, Renwick's training helped me escape before serious harm occurred." Killian's attention shifted toward the captured attacker, now restrained and kneeling before the assembled guards. Recognition flickered across his features as he studied the man's face clearly in the torchlight. "Doran," he said, his voice carrying dangerous calm, despite obvious anger simmering beneath the surface. "One of Garen's most trusted warriors." The captured man, Doran, remained silent, his expression defiant despite his obvious failure. Killian approached slowly, his presence radiating authority and barely contained fury. "Who ordered this attack?" Killian demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Doran remained stubbornly silent, though his eyes flickered briefly toward the fortress interior, an unconscious tell that did not escape Killian's careful observation. "Take him for questioning," Killian instructed the guards. "We will discover the truth behind this attempted attack, one way or another." As guards led Doran away, Killian turned back toward Alara, his expression softening with genuine concern. "Are you certain you are unharmed?" he asked again, gently examining the bruises already forming on her wrist where her attacker had grabbed her. "I am shaken," Alara admitted honestly, "but Renwick's training truly did help me defend myself. I am grateful for his patience during our sessions together." Killian's expression grew troubled as the implications of the attack settled fully upon him. "This confirms our fears," he said quietly. "Garen and Isolde have moved beyond mere political maneuvering into direct action against you, likely hoping your death would eliminate the controversy surrounding our bond entirely. Or perhaps, Alara suggested carefully, they hoped my death would weaken your authority further, providing additional justification for challenging your leadership." Killian nodded grimly, clearly considering this possibility as well. "Either way, this cannot be tolerated. Attempting harm against my claimed mate represents a direct challenge to my authority and the ancient laws governing our bond." Over the following hours, as dawn broke fully over the fortress, Killian personally oversaw the interrogation of Doran, determined to uncover definitive proof, connecting the attack directly to Garen and Isolde's ambitions. Alara, meanwhile, remained under increased guard, unable to fully shake the lingering fear from her near miss with danger, despite her successful defense. Nora sat with her throughout the morning, offering comfort and quiet companionship, while Alara processed the shock of the attempted attack. "This is not your fault," Nora said gently, sensing the guilt evident in Alara's troubled expression. "If I had never come here," Alara said quietly, "none of this political tension, none of this danger, would exist. Perhaps Isolde's right. Perhaps my presence truly does threaten everything Killian has worked to build." "Nonsense," Nora said firmly, taking Alara's hands within her own. "Garen and Isolde have sought opportunities to challenge Killian's authority long before your arrival. You are merely a convenient excuse for ambitions that existed regardless of the circumstances surrounding your bond. Do not allow their manipulation to convince you otherwise." Alara absorbed Nora's words, finding some comfort in the reassurance despite lingering doubts. She thought of everything Killian had risked to save her life, the political capital he had spent defending their bond against increasing challenges, and wondered whether her presence truly was worth such significant complications for a man who had shown her nothing but genuine kindness and respect. By midday, Killian returned from the interrogation, his expression grave but resolute. "Doran has confessed," he announced, gathering Alara, Fenwick, and several trusted advisors within his study. "Garin ordered the attack directly, hoping your death would either eliminate the controversy surrounding our bond, or, failing that, provide justification for challenging my judgment and leadership." "What happens now?" Alara asked, though she suspected she already understood the gravity of the situation unfolding before them. "Garin has committed a severe crime," Killian said firmly. "Ordering harm against my claimed mate represents direct treason against pack law and my authority as Alpha King. He must face formal justice before the full pack council." "Will Ysolde face similar consequences?" Fenwick asked. "If evidence confirms her direct involvement," Killian confirmed, "yes. Though Doran's confession implicates Garin more directly, we must investigate Ysolde's role thoroughly before proceeding with formal accusations." Over the following days, the fortress buzzed with tension as investigations continued, evidence mounting against both Garin and Ysolde's involvement in the attempted attack against Alara. Additional witnesses came forward, describing secretive meetings between the conspirators, plans discussed regarding methods for eliminating what they viewed as a threatening complication to pack stability. Alara found herself increasingly drawn into the investigation, her earlier guilt transforming gradually into determined resolve to see justice properly served, not merely for her own sake, but for the stability and integrity of the community that had become her home over these past weeks. During a private moment together, as evening settled over the fortress once again, Alara voiced concerns that had been building within her throughout the tense investigation. What if formal justice against Garin and Ysolde only deepens the political divide within your pack? She asked. What if punishing them creates martyrs for their cause, strengthening resistance against your leadership rather than weakening it? Killian considered her question carefully, clearly having wrestled with similar concerns himself. "Justice must be served regardless of political consequences," he said finally. "Allowing attempted murder to go unpunished, simply to avoid political complications, would demonstrate far greater weakness than facing whatever resistance emerges from holding conspirators accountable for their actions." Alara nodded, understanding the wisdom within his reasoning, though anxiety about the coming confrontation with Garin and Ysolde continued weighing heavily upon her thoughts. She had faced an executioner's blade weeks ago, had confronted a duke's court to reveal the truth about Edmund Colt's murder. Yet this looming conflict felt somehow more personally threatening, knowing that ambitious individuals within Killian's own community actively sought her death to further their political goals. "Whatever happens," Killian said, sensing her lingering unease, "know that I will protect you, and that our bond, regardless of political complications it might create, remains something I value deeply, and will not abandon simply to appease those seeking to exploit the situation for personal gain." His words offered genuine comfort, and Alara found herself grateful once again for the steady strength and unwavering commitment this remarkable man continued demonstrating throughout their growing relationship. Whatever challenges awaited them in confronting Garin and Ysolde's treachery, she felt increasingly confident that facing them together, rather than allowing fear to drive them apart, represented their best path forward through this dangerous political storm threatening to engulf them both. As night deepened around the fortress, guards maintaining heightened vigilance throughout the grounds following the attempted attack, Alara retired to her chambers, with Killian's reassurances still echoing comfortingly within her mind. Tomorrow would bring the formal confrontation with Garin before the Pack Council, a confrontation that would likely determine not just justice for the attempted attack against her, but the broader trajectory of Killian's leadership and their continued bond moving forward into whatever future awaited them both. The Pack Council convened the following morning within the fortress's Grand Hall, a space Alara had not yet witnessed used for such formal purposes. Elders and respected Pack members filled the chamber, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile, as Alara took her place beside Killian, determined to face whatever accusations Garin might levy against their bond directly, rather than hiding from confrontation. Garin entered flanked by several supporters, his posture radiating false confidence, despite the serious accusations awaiting him. Ysolde stood near him, her expression carefully neutral, though Alara noticed subtle tension in her shoulders that suggested growing anxiety beneath her composed exterior. "Garen," Killian began formally, his voice carrying clearly throughout the silent chamber. "You stand accused of ordering an attack against Alara Vance, my claimed mate, an act that constitutes direct treason against pack law and challenges my authority as Alpha King." "These accusations are baseless," Garen replied, though his voice lacked the conviction necessary to fully mask underlying nervousness. Doran acted alone, driven by his own misguided concerns about the human woman's presence within our community. "Doran has already confessed your direct involvement," Killian countered firmly. "Multiple witnesses have corroborated secretive meetings between yourself, Isolde, and Doran, discussing methods for eliminating what you perceived as an unacceptable threat to pack stability." Murmurs rippled through the assembled council as Killian presented the accumulated evidence methodically: witness testimonies describing overheard conversations, physical evidence connecting Garen directly to weapons used in the attempted attack, documentation revealing months of careful planning behind what had initially appeared as spontaneous political opposition. Garen's composure began cracking under the weight of mounting evidence, his earlier confidence transforming gradually into desperate defensiveness. Even if such meetings occurred, he argued, discussing concerns about pack stability does not constitute treason. "I sought only to protect our traditions from erosion by human influence." "Discussing concerns is not treason," Killian agreed calmly. "Ordering an attempted murder against my claimed mate absolutely is." The council chamber fell silent as this pointed accusation settled heavily over the proceedings. Several elders exchanged troubled glances, clearly weighing the severity of Garen's actions against whatever sympathy his stated concerns about pack tradition might have garnered among more conservative members. Isolde, sensing the shifting tide against her ally, attempted her own defense. "I merely expressed concerns about the wisdom of claiming a human woman," she said carefully. "I had no direct knowledge of any planned attack against her." "Witnesses place you directly within the planning meetings alongside Garen and Doran," Fenwick interjected, presenting additional testimony that contradicted Isolde's claims of ignorance regarding the attack's planning. As the evidence continued mounting, undeniable and thoroughly documented, even Garen's most loyal supporters began withdrawing their vocal support, recognizing the impossibility of continuing to defend actions so clearly documented and confirmed through multiple independent sources. Finally, one of the eldest council members, a respected figure named Priestess Mira, who had remained largely silent throughout the proceedings, spoke with quiet authority that immediately commanded attention throughout the chamber. "The evidence presented today is clear and undeniable," she said. "Garen has committed treason against our Alpha King and pack law through his direct orchestration of attempted murder against a claimed mate. Such actions cannot be tolerated, regardless of whatever concerns motivated them." Her words carried significant weight given her respected position within pack tradition, and Alara watched as remaining resistance to Killian's accusations crumbled entirely under this formal acknowledgement from such a trusted elder. "Garen," Killian said formally, "you are hereby stripped of your position and titles within this pack, exiled from Northern Territories permanently, forbidden from ever returning under penalty of severe consequences." Garen's face contorted with fury and desperation as the severity of his punishment became clear. "You would exile me over a human woman?" he shouted, his composure finally shattering completely. "She is nothing compared to centuries of pack tradition. Nothing compared to the purity of our bloodlines you now threaten through this foolish bond." "Your prejudice against Alara does not justify attempted murder," Killian replied, his voice carrying absolute authority despite Garen's escalating outburst. "Your punishment reflects the severity of your crime, not merely disagreement with my personal choices." Guards moved forward to escort Garen from the chamber, his protests growing increasingly desperate and incoherent as the reality of his exile settled fully upon him. Isolde, meanwhile, faced separate judgment from the council, her punishment ultimately less severe given her more limited direct involvement, though she too faced significant consequences, stripped of her advisory position and placed under careful observation for the foreseeable future. As the council proceedings concluded, Alara found herself overwhelmed by the weight of everything that had transpired. Relief, at seeing justice properly served, mixing uncomfortably with lingering unease about the deep divisions within pack politics that this entire ordeal had revealed. Despite the resolution achieved today, she understood that resentment and prejudice against her presence would likely continue simmering beneath the surface, even without Garen's direct leadership to actively organize opposition. Later that evening, as the fortress gradually settled back into its normal rhythms, following the dramatic council proceedings, Killian found Elara sitting quietly within the gardens, where the attempted attack had occurred just days before. "Are you troubled?" he asked gently, settling beside her on the stone bench overlooking the moonlit mountains. "I am relieved justice was served," Elara admitted honestly, "but I worry this resolution merely addresses the immediate threat rather than the deeper prejudice underlying it. Garen may be exiled, but his sentiments about human presence corrupting pack purity likely persist among others within your community." Killian nodded thoughtfully, clearly having considered similar concerns himself. "You are correct that prejudice cannot be entirely eliminated through a single council ruling," he acknowledged. "But justice served today sends a clear message throughout the pack that such prejudice, when acted upon through violence, will face severe consequences regardless of the perpetrator's standing or stated justifications." "Is that enough?" Elara asked quietly. "To simply punish the actions while the underlying prejudice remains unaddressed?" "No," Killian admitted, "which is why I intend to address these concerns directly and publicly, demonstrating through consistent action and clear communication why our bond matters, why partnership based on genuine connection deserves respect, regardless of traditional boundaries between human and pack communities." Elara studied his determined expression, feeling renewed admiration for this man, who continued proving himself thoughtful and principled, even amid significant political challenges. "You truly believe our bond can help bridge these divisions?" she asked. "I believe it already has, in small but significant ways," Killian said. "Every servant who found courage to speak truth during Victor Colt's investigation, every pack member who has grown to respect your courage and integrity, despite initial skepticism, these represent genuine progress, however incremental it might seem, amid larger political challenges." Elara considered this perspective, finding comfort in recognizing the subtle positive changes that had occurred alongside the more dramatic conflicts she had experienced since arriving at the fortress. Perhaps true progress rarely announced itself through singular, decisive victories, but rather through countless small moments of understanding and connection, accumulating gradually into meaningful, lasting change. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in what our bond represents, even amid such significant challenges and dangerous opposition." Killian reached for her hand, and the familiar warmth spread comfortingly between them, a physical manifestation of the deepening connection that had grown steadily stronger throughout everything they had faced together. "Thank you for your courage," he replied, "for facing every challenge directly, rather than retreating from difficulty, even when circumstances might have justified choosing an easier, safer path." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching moonlight dance across the mountain peaks, both understanding that while today's resolution addressed immediate danger, the broader journey toward genuine acceptance and lasting peace between their different worlds remained ongoing, requiring continued patience, courage, and unwavering commitment from them both, moving forward into whatever challenges still awaited them. Winter descended fully upon the northern fortress in the weeks following Garen's exile, blanketing the mountains in thick snow that transformed the landscape into something breathtakingly beautiful, despite the bitter cold accompanying it. Elara had grown increasingly comfortable within fortress life, her relationship with Killian deepening steadily through countless shared moments, quiet conversations, and mutual support through ongoing political challenges. Yet peace, as Elara had learned repeatedly since that terrifying morning on the execution platform, rarely lasted uninterrupted for long. Reports began arriving with increasing frequency, describing troubling developments within human territories, particularly concerning Duke Alden Colt's kingdom following Victor Colt's imprisonment and subsequent trial. The Duke grows increasingly unstable, Fenwick reported during one particularly tense council meeting, grief over his sons, compounding with growing paranoia about maintaining his authority following the public scandal surrounding Victor's confession. "What specifically concerns you?" Killian asked, his expression already troubled by the implications within Fenwick's careful wording. Reports suggest the Duke has begun secretly gathering military forces, Fenwick continued grimly, potentially preparing for conflict against Northern Territories, perhaps seeking to reclaim authority and respect lost through recent scandals, by demonstrating strength against what he now perceives as a growing threat from Pack influence within his own domain. Ilara's stomach tightened with anxiety at this news. She had hoped the resolution of Edmund's murder investigation, however difficult and painful, might lead toward lasting peace rather than escalating conflict. The possibility that her own circumstances, however unintentionally, might contribute toward war between human and Pack territories filled her with renewed guilt and concern. "We must prepare defenses," Killian said firmly, while simultaneously attempting diplomatic communication to understand the Duke's true intentions before assuming conflict remains inevitable. Over the following weeks, tension continued building steadily. Diplomatic attempts to communicate directly with Duke Alden Colt met increasing resistance, his advisors deflecting or outright refusing meaningful dialogue, while reports of military preparation within his territory continued mounting, despite these diplomatic efforts. Ilara found herself increasingly drawn into strategic discussions, her first-hand knowledge of the Duke's household and political tendencies proving valuable as Killian's advisors attempted to understand and anticipate potential threats emerging from human territories. Despite her contributions being genuinely appreciated, she could not entirely shake persistent guilt regarding her role in these escalating tensions. "This is not your burden to carry," Killian reminded her gently during one particularly difficult evening, sensing her troubled thoughts through their strengthening bond. "The Duke's instability stems from his own choices, his own failures to properly address Edmund's murder honestly, rather than seeking convenient scapegoats. You bear no responsibility for his subsequent paranoia and aggression. Yet if war comes," Ilara said quietly, "it will be because of circumstances surrounding my rescue, my bond with you, representing exactly the kind of change he fears, threatens his traditional authority. War, if it comes," Killian replied firmly, "will result from the Duke's own choices, his refusal to accept accountability and adapt to necessary change. We cannot control his decisions, only prepare appropriately for whatever consequences they might bring." Despite these reassurances, anxiety continued building steadily throughout the fortress, as reports confirmed the Duke's military buildup had progressed significantly, various human lords being pressured or bribed into contributing forces for what increasingly appeared to be inevitable conflict against Northern Territories. One evening, as Ilara reviewed strategic maps alongside Killian and his senior advisors, a messenger arrived bearing urgent news that confirmed their worst fears. "My king," the messenger reported breathlessly, having ridden hard through worsening winter conditions, "Duke Alden Colt has formally declared intentions to reclaim what he terms rightful human authority over Northern Territories, citing Pack influence and unlawful claiming of human citizens as justification for military action." The declaration, though not entirely unexpected given weeks of escalating tension, still landed with devastating weight throughout the assembled council. War, previously discussed as concerning possibility, had suddenly transformed into imminent reality, requiring immediate preparation and response. "How long before his forces might reach our territory?" Killian asked, his expression grim but focused, already shifting into strategic planning mode despite the emotional weight of this devastating news. "Perhaps 2 weeks, given current weather conditions and the logistics of moving significant military forces through winter terrain," the messenger estimated. 2 weeks. Ilara felt the weight of this timeline settling heavily upon her chest, understanding that whatever peaceful future she had begun imagining alongside Killian now faced serious jeopardy from conflict, rooted, at least partially, in circumstances surrounding her own rescue and continued presence within Northern Territories. "We must prepare our defenses immediately," Killian instructed his advisors, already shifting focus toward practical military strategy. "Alert allied packs regarding the Duke's declaration, request reinforcements where possible, and begin fortifying our most vulnerable border territories." As the council meeting dissolved into urgent preparation, Ilara found herself standing alone momentarily, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from cautious hope toward imminent conflict. Killian, noticing her troubled expression amid the chaos of preparation, paused briefly to offer reassurance. "Whatever comes," he said quietly, taking her hands within his own. Know that this war, should it truly become unavoidable, represents far more than merely our personal bond. The Duke seeks to reassert traditional human dominance over territories that have maintained careful, hard-won peace for generations. This conflict, if it occurs, would have arisen eventually regardless of our specific circumstances. But my presence provided convenient justification, Ilara said, her voice heavy with lingering guilt despite his reassurance. Convenient justification is not the same as genuine cause, Killian replied firmly. The Duke's own instability, his refusal to accept accountability for his family's failures, these represent the true roots of this coming conflict, not our bond or your presence within these walls. Ilara wanted desperately to fully accept his reassurance, yet doubt continued lingering despite his confident words. She thought of the crowd that had once jeered for her execution, wondering how many among Duke Alden Colt's forces would march into battle believing genuinely that reclaiming her, punishing her for daring to accept an Alpha King's protection, represented righteous justice rather than mere political convenience. Over the following days, the fortress transformed steadily from peaceful community into fortified stronghold preparing for war. Warriors trained relentlessly, strategists planned defensive positions along vulnerable border territories, and messages continued flowing between Killian's forces and allied packs, willing to provide crucial reinforcement against the approaching human military threat. Ilara, refusing to remain passive during these critical preparations, insisted on contributing however possible, assisting healers in preparing medical supplies for anticipated casualties, helping strategize based on her knowledge of human military tactics and the Duke's likely approach given his temperament and available resources. You do not need to involve yourself so directly, Nora suggested gently during one exhausting preparation session, clearly concerned about the physical and emotional toll these preparations were taking upon Ilara. I cannot simply remain idle while war approaches, particularly knowing my circumstances contributed toward this conflict, Ilara replied firmly. If I can help protect this community, protect Killian and everyone who has shown me such genuine kindness, despite initial uncertainty, then I must contribute however I am able. As the 2-week timeline continued counting down, tension within the fortress grew increasingly palpable, anticipation and dread mixing uncomfortably as warriors completed final preparations. Allied forces began arriving to bolster northern defenses, and scouts reported the Duke's forces drawing steadily closer through the winter landscape. On the evening before scouts confirmed the Duke's forces would finally arrive at northern borders, Killian found Ilara standing alone atop the fortress walls, watching distant torchlight flickering ominously across the snow-covered horizon, marking the approach of the human military force that would soon test everything they had built together. "Are you frightened?" he asked quietly, joining her at the wall's edge. "Terrified," Ilara admitted honestly, though not merely for myself. "I fear for everyone within these walls, for the innocent warriors who will fight and possibly die in a conflict rooted, at least partially, in circumstances surrounding my own survival." Killian wrapped his arm around her shoulders, offering silent comfort as they both watched the distant torchlight drawing steadily closer. "Tomorrow will test us severely," he acknowledged, "but whatever challenges await, know that facing them alongside you, protecting what we have built together, represents something worth fighting for, regardless of whatever sacrifice it might ultimately require." Ilara leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his steady presence, despite the mounting dread accompanying tomorrow's inevitable confrontation. Whatever happened during the coming battle, she understood clearly now that she would not face it as passive victim awaiting rescue, but as active participant, fighting alongside the man and community that had given her genuine purpose and belonging, following that terrifying morning when an executioner's blade had nearly ended her life entirely. Dawn broke gray and cold over the northern fortress, the kind of morning light that offered no warmth, only pale illumination, revealing the massive human force assembled across the snow-covered valley below. Ilara stood atop the fortress walls beside Killian, surveying the seemingly endless rows of soldiers, cavalry, and siege equipment that Duke Alden Colt had gathered for this desperate attempt to reassert his authority. "There are so many," she whispered, the scale of the approaching conflict finally settling with devastating clarity. "Numbers alone do not determine victory," Killian replied, though his expression remained tightly focused on the strategic challenges ahead. Our defensive position, combined with allied reinforcements and the natural advantages of mountain terrain, provides significant tactical advantages despite their numerical superiority. Throughout the following hours, both sides prepared for the inevitable clash. Warriors taking defensive positions along fortress walls and strategic mountain passes, while human forces below organized their approach with the methodical precision of experienced military command. Alara found herself stationed within the healer's quarters initially, preparing medical supplies and treatment areas for anticipated casualties, though restlessness and determination eventually drove her toward more active participation as battle preparations intensified. The first assault came shortly after midday, human forces launching a coordinated attack against the fortress's main gate, while simultaneous units attempted flanking maneuvers through narrow mountain passes that Killian's scouts had identified as vulnerable points, requiring reinforcement. The battle that followed tested every aspect of the careful preparation both sides had invested throughout the preceding weeks. Warriors clashed fiercely along the fortress walls, arrows and projectiles filling the air with deadly precision, while below, the massive human force pressed relentlessly against defensive positions, despite mounting casualties from northern archers, positioned strategically along elevated terrain. Alara, unable to remain passive amid such intense conflict, found herself assisting wounded warriors as they were carried from active combat zones, applying pressure to wounds and administering basic treatments, while more experienced healers addressed severe injuries, requiring specialized attention. The chaos and brutality of actual warfare proved far more visceral and terrifying than any strategic discussion had prepared her for, yet she pressed forward despite mounting horror, understanding that every wounded warrior she helped stabilize represented one more person who might survive this devastating conflict. As afternoon progressed toward evening, the battle's momentum shifted repeatedly, neither side gaining decisive advantage, despite hours of intense fighting. Killian moved constantly between strategic positions, coordinating defenses, personally engaging enemy forces when necessary, his presence providing crucial morale boost to northern warriors, despite the overwhelming challenges they faced. During a brief lull in fighting, as both sides regrouped and reassessed their positions, Alara found herself near enough to overhear a desperate conversation between two wounded human soldiers being treated within a makeshift enemy medical area, established during a temporary ceasefire for treating the most severely wounded from both sides. "This is madness," one soldier whispered to his companion, his voice heavy with exhaustion and doubt. "The Duke drags us into this conflict over grief and wounded pride, sacrificing countless lives for reasons that seem increasingly unclear the longer this battle continues." "Quiet," his companion warned nervously, glancing around for potential eavesdroppers among the Duke's officers. "Such words constitute treason." Alara absorbed this exchange thoughtfully, recognizing genuine doubt and reluctance existing even among the Duke's own forces, suggesting that his declared war carried far less unified support than his aggressive military buildup might have initially suggested. Perhaps, she considered, this conflict's resolution might come not merely through continued bloodshed, but through recognizing and addressing the underlying doubts and reluctance already present within human ranks. She shared this observation with Killian during another brief lull as evening approached, both sides having sustained significant casualties throughout the day's brutal fighting. "There is doubt among his soldiers," she reported. "Many question why they fight, recognizing this conflict serves the Duke's wounded pride more than genuine necessity." Killian considered this information carefully, exhaustion evident in his features despite his continued strategic focus. "If genuine doubt exists among his forces," he said thoughtfully, "perhaps direct communication, bypassing the Duke's own leadership, might help resolve this conflict before further unnecessary casualties occur on both sides." As darkness began settling over the battlefield, both sides withdrawing temporarily to tend wounded and prepare for likely renewed conflict the following day, Killian made a bold decision. "I will request direct parley with Duke Alden Colt," he announced to his assembled advisors. "Perhaps reason can still prevail before this conflict escalates into complete devastation for both our peoples." The request for parley, delivered under flag of truce as darkness fully descended, was met with initial resistance from the Duke's officers, though eventually, perhaps recognizing the mounting casualties and uncertain outcome despite the day's intense fighting. The Duke agreed to meet directly with Killian, within neutral ground between their respective forces. Elara insisted on accompanying Killian to this crucial meeting, despite his initial concerns about her safety given the tense circumstances. "I have faced this Duke before," she reminded him firmly. "Perhaps my presence, representing the resolution of Edmund's murder investigation and the genuine partnership our bond represents, might help demonstrate exactly why this conflict serves no legitimate purpose." Reluctantly, Killian agreed, and together they approached the designated meeting point where Duke Alden Colt waited, flanked by several exhausted-looking advisors, his own expression carrying the weight of grief, exhaustion, and mounting doubt about the wisdom of his declared war. "Alpha King," the Duke said formally, though his voice lacked the earlier confidence and aggression that had characterized his previous interactions with Killian and Elara. "You requested this parley. Speak your intentions." "This conflict serves no legitimate purpose beyond wounded pride and grief," Killian said directly, foregoing diplomatic pleasantries given the urgent circumstances. "Your son Victor's crimes, your own failure to properly investigate Edmund's murder, these represent your family's failures, not justification for sacrificing countless soldiers from both our peoples in continued warfare." The Duke's expression flickered with something between anger and reluctant acknowledgement. "You claimed a human citizen, disrupting traditional authority and boundaries that have maintained order for generations," he countered, though his voice carried less conviction than his earlier declarations. "I saved an innocent woman from wrongful execution," Killian replied firmly. "A woman who has since proven instrumental in revealing the truth about your own son's crimes, truth you desperately wish to avoid confronting." Elara stepped forward then, addressing the Duke directly despite her racing heart. "I bear you no ill will for your earlier judgment," she said honestly. "Grief clouds judgment, and losing one son to murder while discovering your remaining son as the true culprit represents devastating tragedy, beyond what anyone should reasonably endure. But continuing this war will not restore Edmund, will not undo Victor's crimes, will only sacrifice more innocent lives, in pursuit of vengeance against circumstances that were never truly anyone's fault beyond your own family's tragic choices." The Duke stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his exhausted, grief-stricken eyes. "You speak with remarkable composure," he said finally, "for someone I nearly had executed. I have learned, through everything I have endured, that dwelling in bitterness serves no productive purpose," Elara replied honestly. "I would rather see peace restored between our peoples than continued suffering born from grief and misplaced anger." The Duke remained silent for several long moments, clearly wrestling internally with pride, grief, and growing recognition of the war's ultimate futility. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with exhaustion and reluctant acknowledgement. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "this conflict has already claimed enough lives, achieved nothing beyond confirming what should have been obvious from the beginning. Continuing merely to preserve wounded pride serves no one, particularly not the countless soldiers who have already died today defending choices born from my own grief and desperation." "Then let us end this conflict," Killian said firmly, though carefully, recognizing the delicate nature of this pivotal moment. "Formal peace between our territories, acknowledgement of the ancient laws governing bonds, like the one connecting Elara and myself, and mutual commitment toward preventing future conflicts, born from misunderstanding, rather than genuine necessity." The Duke considered this proposal for several tense moments, before finally nodding slowly. "Agreed," he said quietly. "Enough blood has been spilled today, over choices that should never have led toward war in the first place." As formal agreements began taking shape between advisors from both sides, Elara felt overwhelming relief flooding through her exhausted body. The devastating battle that had claimed so many lives throughout this brutal day had finally found resolution, not through additional bloodshed, but through honest acknowledgement of grief, mistakes, and the ultimate futility of continued conflict, rooted in wounded pride rather than genuine necessity. Killian glanced toward her, exhaustion and relief mixing across his own features as the formal peace negotiations began solidifying into concrete agreements that would hopefully prevent future conflict between their peoples. "You helped make this possible," he said quietly, genuine gratitude evident in his voice. Your words reached him in ways my own arguments alone likely could not have accomplished. We accomplished this together, Elara replied, exhaustion finally catching up with her, as the adrenaline of the day's terrifying events began fading into overwhelming relief. As we have accomplished everything since that terrible morning when you first intervened to stop my execution. As formal peace was finally declared between Northern Territories and Duke Alden Colt's kingdom, ending the brief but devastating conflict that had claimed too many lives throughout its single day of brutal fighting, Elara allowed herself, finally, to imagine a future built upon genuine peace, rather than merely survival. A future she would build alongside Killian, strengthened rather than diminished by everything they had endured and overcome together throughout this remarkable, terrifying, ultimately transformative journey that had begun with an executioner's blade raised above her head and had led, through countless unexpected turns, toward this hard-won moment of hope and resolution. The days following the fragile peace agreement brought exhausted relief throughout the northern fortress, warriors and healers working tirelessly to tend the wounded, while diplomatic advisors from both territories worked to solidify the formal treaty that would prevent future conflict between human and pack communities. Elara found herself deeply involved in these negotiations, her unique position as both former human citizen and claimed mate to the Alpha King, providing valuable perspective as formal terms were carefully drafted and debated. Duke Alden Colt, transformed significantly by the devastating losses suffered during the brief but brutal conflict, approached these negotiations with genuine humility that surprised many who remembered his earlier arrogance and aggressive posturing. Grief over Edmund's death, combined with the painful revelation of Victor's guilt and the devastating cost of his own declared war, had clearly forced significant reflection upon the Duke, transforming him gradually into someone genuinely committed toward lasting peace, rather than merely reluctant acceptance of unavoidable defeat. I have caused tremendous suffering through my own poor judgment, the Duke admitted during one particularly candid negotiation session, addressing Killian and Elara directly, refusing to properly investigate Edmund's murder, allowing grief and pride to justify unnecessary warfare. These choices have cost countless lives that might have been preserved through wiser leadership. Acknowledging these failures represents important progress, Killian replied diplomatically, though genuine respect had begun replacing his earlier wariness regarding the Duke's character and judgment. Moving forward with genuine commitment toward lasting peace matters more than dwelling excessively upon past mistakes, however serious they might have been. Over the following weeks, formal treaty negotiations continued steadily, establishing clear guidelines for interaction between human territories and northern pack communities, protections for citizens choosing bonds across traditional boundaries similar to Elara and Killian's own relationship, and mutual commitments toward addressing future disputes through diplomatic negotiation rather than immediate military escalation. Elara found herself increasingly recognized throughout both communities as a symbol of the genuine partnership possible between human and pack peoples. Her courage throughout the murder investigation, the attempted attack against her life, and the devastating conflict with Duke Alden Colt's forces, earning respect from individuals who had initially viewed her with skepticism or outright hostility. Even Isolde, though still facing consequences for her involvement in Garen's earlier conspiracy, approached Elara directly during this period of gradual healing and reconciliation. I misjudged you, Isolde admitted, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine, if somewhat reluctant acknowledgement. Your courage, throughout everything that has transpired, has demonstrated qualities I failed to recognize when I first questioned your presence within our community. Thank you for your honesty, Elara replied graciously, understanding the difficulty inherent in such an admission from someone who had previously viewed her as a significant threat to pack tradition and stability. Perhaps we can move forward, focusing on building genuine understanding rather than dwelling upon earlier conflicts. As formal peace solidified between the territories, and healing continued steadily throughout both communities, Killian approached Elara one evening with an expression that combined nervousness with obvious excitement, an unusual combination given his typically composed and authoritative demeanor. I have been considering something important, he said carefully, guiding her toward the same garden where they had first discussed the possibility of deepening their bond months earlier, something that extends beyond the ancient law that initially brought us together. Ilara's heart raced with anticipation, sensing the significance evident within his careful words and nervous energy. "What have you been considering?" she asked. Killian knelt before her then, producing a beautifully crafted ring, fashioned from silver and inlaid with a stone that seemed to capture and reflect moonlight with ethereal brilliance. "Ilara Vance," he said, his voice steady, despite obvious vulnerability evident in his expression. "I claimed you initially to save your life, invoking ancient law during circumstances neither of us could have anticipated. But everything that has grown between us since that terrifying morning, the trust, the partnership, the genuine love I have come to feel for you, none of this stemmed from obligation or supernatural pull alone. I love you, completely and without reservation, and I would be deeply honored if you would choose to become my wife, my true partner, ruling alongside me, not through ancient law's requirement, but through genuine choice and mutual devotion." Tears filled Ilara's eyes as she absorbed the profound sincerity within his proposal, memories flooding through her mind of everything they had endured together since that terrifying morning on the execution platform. The fear and uncertainty of those early days, the growing trust cultivated through shared investigation and honest conversation, the devastating attack that had tested their bond's strength, the war that had threatened everything they had built together, all of it culminating in this beautiful, unexpected moment of genuine love and commitment, freely chosen, rather than merely accepted through ancient obligation. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion despite the simple clarity of her answer. "Yes, I choose you, completely and without reservation, not because ancient law demands it, but because I love you. Because everything we have built together represents exactly the kind of partnership I never imagined finding, especially not following such a terrifying beginning." Killian rose, slipping the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, before pulling her into an embrace that conveyed depths of emotion far beyond what words alone could express. They remained wrapped together beneath the moonlit sky, both finally allowing themselves to fully embrace the profound joy of choosing genuine partnership after surviving such devastating trials together. News of their engagement spread quickly throughout the fortress, met with genuine celebration from most community members who had witnessed Ilara's courage and integrity throughout the past months of trials and challenges. Preparations began immediately for a formal ceremony that would celebrate not merely their personal union, but symbolize the broader hope for lasting peace and understanding between human and pack communities that their relationship had come to represent. The ceremony itself, held several weeks later as winter began gradually yielding toward the first hints of spring, brought together representatives from both territories in unprecedented celebration. Duke Alden Colt himself attended, his presence marking significant progress in the reconciliation between their peoples, watching with something approaching genuine warmth as Killian and Ilara formally exchanged vows before assembled witnesses from throughout both communities. "I never imagined," the Duke admitted quietly to Ilara during the celebration following the ceremony, "that circumstances beginning with such devastating tragedy could ultimately lead towards such genuine hope and healing. Your strength throughout everything you endured has taught me valuable lessons about resilience and the possibility of redemption, even following the most painful mistakes. We all carry the capacity for growth and change," Ilara replied graciously. "Regardless of past failures or difficult circumstances, I am grateful we found our way toward genuine peace rather than continued conflict." As celebrations continued throughout the evening, warriors and citizens from both human and pack communities mingling with growing comfort and genuine camaraderie, Ilara found herself standing beside Killian, surveying the joyful scene with profound gratitude for everything that had led toward this remarkable moment of unity and hope. "We have accomplished something truly significant," Killian said quietly, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders as they watched the celebration continue around them. "Not merely our own personal happiness, but genuine progress toward lasting peace and understanding between peoples who once viewed each other with fear and suspicion." "It began with fear," Ilara reflected, remembering that terrifying morning when the executioner's blade had been raised above her head, moments from ending her life entirely. But somehow, through everything that followed, fear transformed gradually into genuine understanding, and eventually, into love strong enough to help heal even the deepest divisions between our different worlds. As the celebration continued late into the night, laughter and music filling the fortress with warmth, despite the lingering winter chill, Ilara allowed herself finally to fully embrace the profound joy of this moment, understanding that whatever challenges still awaited them in building lasting peace between human and pack communities, she would face them alongside Killian, her chosen partner, her true love, the man who had raised his voice against an executioner's blade and claimed her not merely through ancient law, but through genuine devotion that had only grown stronger through every trial they had faced together. Their journey, beginning with such devastating terror and uncertainty, had led toward something neither of them could have imagined that terrible morning on the execution platform. A partnership built upon genuine love, mutual respect, and shared commitment toward building something better than the fear and division that had once defined relations between their separate worlds. Whatever future awaited them, Ilara understood with profound certainty that she would face it with hope rather than fear, with love rather than merely survival, standing beside the Alpha King who had claimed her before the blade could fall, and who had since proven, time and again, that his claim represented not merely obligation under ancient law, but genuine devotion that would guide them both toward a future filled with lasting peace, deep partnership, and the kind of profound happiness she had never dared imagine possible before that fateful morning when everything in her world had changed forever.